I heard somebody say they wanna rumble.
Rumble. Now this is a movie that was a long time coming. Yes, the concept of monster wrestling does seem like a great fit for an animated feature, but that's not necessarily what I'm talking about. Ever since it began production back in 2015 by taking some inspiration from Rob Harrell's Monster on the Hill, this collaboration between Real Effects, Paramount Animation, and WWE waited quite a long time to finally have its chance to show off its moves. It was supposed to come out at the end of July 2020, but there was just one problem. The world started a cataclysmic pandemic, so even the idea of going to the movies became obsolete. From there, the film kept on moving to find a new release date, changing it to January of the following year, then May, then going to the year after on February of 2022. However, with more new variants of the virus taking over, and some people still refuse to do the right thing and listen to medical experts, Paramount ultimately decided to say screw it and skip the theatrical experience entirely so that it could be a Paramount Plus exclusive. Sure, the big monsters won't have their time to shine on the big screen, but at least they can finally get the show rolling. So now that Steve has officially entered the ring, will this movie be a grand slam, or will this get a penalty for unsportsmanlike conduct? Let's get ready to find out. The story. Let me start this off by saying that I love this idea of monster wrestling. Like I said before, it has a lot of potential to form a strong animated feature that not only can make the most out of the animation, but also create this admirable world building where humans and monsters coincide as they mainly practice the sport of wrestling. Granted, the world of this movie doesn't do a whole lot to make it unique, where it's a more wrestling-obsessed place, but the big difference is that the monsters just so happen to be the wrestlers. But still, this is a movie where it knows that it has a winning strategy and will do everything in its power to use it in order to deliver one heck of an animated movie. However, there is just one monster-sized problem.
Man, why can't I think of more sports cliches?
As headstrong as it is that it has a great concept, the movie's biggest problem is that it has no care for the story. It obviously wants to think of cool monsters and what kind of wrestling moves that they could do in the ring, but the treatment to the storytelling here is almost negligent. Since wrestling is considered a sport, this has the well-known textbook narrative of the underdog climbing up the ranks to beat the champion villain and save the day. Or specifically in this case, this movie is about Winnie and Steve, the kids of former champion Rayburn and coach Jimbo Coyle, teaming up to beat the odds and save the Stoker Stadium from being turned into a parking lot. When looking past what the sport itself is, it is a full-on copy-and-paste plotline that follows the exact same cliches and the exact same emotional moments that result in making this feature right from the beginning as unenjoyably predictable as it can be. But if that wasn't enough, even the moral of the movie is unoriginal, where it teaches its audience that you don't have to follow the traditional rules of the sport in order to be on top, and that you can have fun with it along the way.
This ain't monster wrestling. It's an affront to the sport and you know it. We all should be shocked and appalled.
But somehow, they've won 3 in a row.
Now, I don't have a problem with the message itself. I do agree with it. It's just that Space Jam: A New Legacy, which was released a few months prior to this, has the exact same message. In fact, I could almost say that the plot of both Rumble and Space Jam 2 are nearly identical. Sure, there are some key differences, but they both follow just about the same beat with their story. And since the plot of Space Jam 2 is often considered its weakest asset, the same can be said about Rumble. The only silver lining that I can find from all this is that there is a bit of heart coming from the leads. I can explain more about this later, but the one thing that can have audiences emotionally invested to stick around for the ride, even outside of the ring, is the bond between Winnie and Steve, as they both train to make a name for themselves and focus on saving both the town of Stoker and the legacy of Rayburn and Jimbo. I can see when they can have their touching moments that can work, but still,
those times can only do so much to put a band-aid on the main issue, and don't really change that it can be a tiresome experience with how cliched most of the picture can be. Monster wrestling is a unique idea for a film, but the story makes this feel nothing more than the bland and banal sports movie. The animation. Oh yes, I am fully aware that I landed a harsh blow on the story. But that's not to say that I hate this movie entirely. The writing may not have done justice to the concept of monster wrestling, but the animation, on the other hand, is able to take full advantage of this idea. If there is one thing that is worthwhile and where the hardest work was put into, it's undeniably with the animation. Of course, you can't have monster wrestling without some monsters to wrestle, and this is where most of the film's creativity is put in. Each of the monsters are uniquely designed with their own themes and abilities, ranging from King Gorge really playing with the term bulldog, to Ramarilla being a giant gorilla with a ram on his head, to Lucha Luchin as a Mesoamerican themed dragon, to Tentacular with his aquatic theming and his tentacles that can form his arms. With their designs that make them stand out from one another, they also provide the movie with a lot of color and character animation that lets the animators think outside of the box of how they go around or what kind of moves they could pull on each other, not only showing off many of the famous moves commonly found in wrestling, but also using their special abilities in order to make them more exciting and be the highlights of the picture. Even with Steve, while he may look like an extra from Monsters, Inc., he does provide some additional flair with the visuals with his dance moves. Yes, in the movie they do talk about if dancing can be considered legitimate wrestling, but for the sake of the wrestling scenes with Steve, they do serve their purpose by being more fun and make things unexpected as he's using the samba to go around his opponents.
Yes! Yes! Keep it up! It's working! Yes! Now!
When looking below the monsters, the humans also look pretty good, going for a more realistic and almost Disney-like design that translates well in CG. But another thing that makes the overall animation a spectacle to watch is how it pays close attention to detail. This is the kind of computer animated film that tries to both look and feel as real as possible, and manages to do so effectively by applying strong detail to make everything look convincing, including the textures of the environment, the clothing, and on the monsters with their fur, scales, feathers, and more, and play around with size to sell how this world accommodates both people and monsters.
But that means Stoker needs a monster.
Yeah. No.
Listen to me. I can help you. Just come with me to Stoker.
Even with its low-quality writing, I cannot say that this is the kind of movie where no effort was put into it or that it's a wasted opportunity. The animation is what sells the idea of monster wrestling, and the movie presents it in full display to make, what might sound crazy, some of the better animation of the year. The characters. With a story that is as unoriginal and tiresome as this, it does also affect the characters to where the roles that they play cannot exceed the typical archetypes that these plots have. In fact, there are only two characters that the movie fully follows. There's Steve, the amateur athlete that is trying to climb up the ranks in monster wrestling, and Winnie, the coach that believes in Steve to be the new champion and save Stoker from letting greedy rich people from across town to get their hands on the stadium. The film does attempt to add a few layers to them, like Winnie's goal of maintaining her dad's legacy and Steve's passion for dancing that has often been shunned throughout his life that results in his emotional scar, but their purpose in the film is nothing more than just that: be the rising athlete and the supportive coach. How they are in the story and how they are to each other is no different than any other leading coaches and rising athletes in these types of films. But even with their cliched parts, they do have something that does provide a bit of likability, and that is their voices. Specifically, Will Arnett and Geraldine Viswanathan. Just like the animation, their acting is an element that isn't just one of the strengths of the movie, but is actually all around great. Even for a movie like this, they really gave it their all to give power to their words and to have the leads feel like they genuinely mean what they say. It's really through the acting that makes Winnie care so much about saving Stoker, and is what gives Steve that sense that he can be much more than some paid wrestler who's meant to always lose.
You ruined losing for me. And you know what? It feels good. So, thank you.
Rayburn, Thank you.
But especially, it's because of the voices that make the heart noticeable. As unoriginal as they may be in the writing, Arnett and Viswanathan do sell that their mission is to help each other as much as it is for helping Stoker. That's why this movie is about those two as much as it is about wrestling. As for the other characters, they don't necessarily have that much of a role in the story. The other monsters are just meant to enhance the world of monster wrestling, while the people are either there to support Winnie or to remind the audience that she better do something fast or else she'll lose the stadium. They also try to provide some humor to make this more of a comedy, but honestly, it's only Will Arnett and some of the monsters who are able to be somewhat funny. The only other significant character in the movie is Tentacular, the new monster wrestling champion that abandoned Stoker and wants to take the town down to bury the legacy of Rayburn and Jimbo so that he is regarded as the best wrestler. In other words, he's just the mean and selfish villain and the ultimate obstacle that Steve and Winnie have to face by the end of the film.
I don't understand.
Oh, you still don't get it, do you? It was never about the money. Stoker Stadium is coming down because I want it to.
I'll admit that some of them can have some charm, and that's especially thanks to some great acting, but for the most part, they can only be as good as the writing can let them be. This movie was definitely not ready to rumble, but yet surprisingly did not tumble. Rumble is a monster-sized mixed bag where it balances elements that are both amazing and terrible to deliver an animated feature that is more or less passable. With its core concept of monster wrestling at hand, it suffers from abysmal writing that provides the same weak underdog sports story and the same cliched characters that all play the usual tiresome roles, but it also benefits from having great animation that really brings up its unique sport to life and voice acting that gives some of the characters a soul. As it is all about monster wrestling, it's really about having fun to see that than it is to watch a good movie. So if you like the idea of it, then you might get some enjoyment out of this, especially if you are a wrestling fan where you can also point out some of the voices from the WWE. It may not be a belt-winning champion or a memorable match, but it did pull off some solid moves.
We're a joke.
And just for the tiniest moment there, I was feeling okay about myself.
Yeah, well, that's over now.